Hey everyone, and welcome to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and we don't talk about video games all that much on this channel. We don't have a dedicated video game show. We haven't in a long time. But I do play video games, and I don't typically do a best of the year list because I only tend to play two or three of the bigger games per year, the ones that interest me, because there's a lot of genres that I don't really care for. But it's the end of a decade, and being the end of a decade means that I have 10 years to look at, and I have 10 years to say, hey, these are my favourite games of the past 10 years. So the decade being, of course, 2010 to 2019. So this is going to be my top 10 video games of the decade. I'm just going to list them, and I'll go into them, and that's going to be it. I should mention before I start this that I am actually streaming this live as well. The live chat is over to the side. If you go to the 12-hour Christmas stream, you can see this unedited with chat playing back if you want their reactions. That's why the rest of the screen looks like it does. But this is the sort of the final finished version, which you'll be seeing. So here we go. So without further ado, number 10 is Spider-Man, which came out last year and was a PS4 exclusive. It is worth mentioning that there won't be any Xbox exclusives on this list or Nintendo exclusives because I don't own either of those consoles. So purely because I can play most things I want to in either PS4 or PC. Spider-Man has obviously got a lot to the Arkham franchise. The Arkham franchise, the Batman games, were kind of revolutionary in 2009 when the first one came out, because it kind of ushered in this new kind of sentiment. Because before that, like, if you got a superhero game, for the most part, you were getting a movie tie-in, or you were getting a sort of cheap, like, third-party thing. You get a lot of Activision games, a lot of THQ games that would do just this really generic round around or flying around, like punching things, and wouldn't be that intricate. And Arkham Asylum said, no, we can have our own version of the Batman universe, and we can have all these villains. We can act as if all this history is here. It brought in Mark Hamill and Kevin Conroy for the voices to give it some sort of prestige, and brought in a writer from the animated series. Paul Dini was involved. Really interesting. So obviously that had a franchise that had Arkham Asylum, City, Origins, which was, despite reusing some of the map, was quite good, and then Arkham Knight in 2015. And Spider-Man took a lot of the lessons from that. The combat is very comparable, but what it does differently is it has a really fun way of moving around, and it's one of these things where if you go back and play Batman now, one of the things that I loved in Batman was when, like, obviously the gliding mechanic that they added mainly in the second one in City, because City added the open world sort of area, is that if you when you were gliding through the city, you could dive down and then swoop up, and it would increase your speed and sort of lift you back up. So you could kind of effectively fly, essentially, by just doing that every so often and regaining your wind. And I remember that being really fun. The weird thing is that going back and playing those Batman games after playing Spider-Man is that mechanic feels so slow. Moving around with Batman in those games feels very slow and clunky versus Spider-Man. Spider-Man's movement is phenomenal. I typically don't like a lot of open world games, mainly because I find that the main quests suffer from just being parts of the already open world. The open worlds tend to be not that interesting to move around in. Tends to be, inundated with a bunch of side quests. And Spider-Man does have a lot of side sort of mission trees that you can go down and do. And I did, because I got the platinum, so I did do everything in the game. I didn't do the DLC. I haven't played the DLC, but I've played all the main game. And what's really good about it is you have so much fun moving around. There's so much parkour. There's so much, like, jumping and leaping and gaining speed and gaining momentum and darting around things. You feel great. You feel like you're like a pro at this as you're flying around. You're a little bit sloppy for the first hour of the game when you're still learning how to do it. But once you start unlocking more skills and you start unlocking more ways to move around, you eventually feel like, no, I know this city. I know Manhattan. I can fly around, or that's just swing around to my heart's content. And you feel like a badass doing it. And the same goes for the fighting, where the one weird thing is that some of the control, it plays very similar to the Arkham games in terms of the fighting, but the buttons aren't the exact same. So for the first little while, I kept pressing one of the wrong buttons because I was so used to the Arkham games. But once you start bringing in the gadgets, which admittedly feels a bit more forced to Spider-Man, I don't associate Spider-Man with having lots and lots of gadgets like Batman does, which made more sense. But Once you bring in that, there's web blasts and stuff into sort of web bombs and things like that. There is a stealth element where maybe that's also where it feels like it takes from Arkham, is that it kind of takes the formula of Arkham a little bit. But moving around feels a lot nicer. And I think the story's really solid, and the main missions don't suffer from that open world problem that a lot of other games do, because my problem with a lot of open world games when you get to a main quest is that it just feels like, okay, we're just out in the main part of the map again. Most of these main missions have dedicated interior designs. They have intricate, locations that are built inside buildings or wherever. And even if they are outside, it'll be significantly different to when you're just swinging about out in the open. And it's something that because I remember being worried when City went open world, because it's going to be like an open world game. I don't want some sort of Batman Grand Theft Auto knockoff. And luckily, all the main missions, once you got to those waypoints, the missions still felt like they were just as well designed as the first game, as Arkham Asylum. So Spider-Man, very good. Voice cast is really great. I actually really enjoyed the story. Much like the Batman games, it does a good job of including a lot of the villains and a lot of the tangential characters. If you're a fan of the comics or the movies, you start to recognize a lot of different characters. You get excited about where things can go in sequels and things like that. It teases a lot of cool things. It owes a lot to the Arkham games, but in a lot of ways advances it. If I was to compare them, beat for beat, and say, is there stuff that the Arkham games do better than Spider-Man? There is. I think the raw storytelling in the Arkham games is a little bit better, particularly Arkham Knight and Arkham City. I think the raw storytelling is better in those two games maybe than Spider-Man. But Spider-Man's still very good, and Spider-Man has probably got a better story, certainly than Arkham Asylum, I think. And it does a lot of credit to a lot of the different characters. And then obviously it's the prettiest of all these games because it's the newest of all these games. And it's bright and it's pretty, and one of my favourite things in the game is swinging around the city at the magical hour, that time where it's just kind of like, the sun's starting to set, but you get all these great shadows as you're flying through, and it does that great thing where if you spin the camera as you're swinging, you actually see yourself going past the sun in silhouette, and it feels really pretty. And there's a photo mode, you make use of the photo mode, it's very pretty. All that stuff's really great. And the biggest reason I can say why this game is fantastic is that it's not that often where I will keep playing a game as soon as it comes out until I beat it, and then platinum it, especially. Now, sometimes whether or not I platinum it is just based on what sort of trophies are there. Like, sometimes the trophies are just made so hard that I know I'm never going to do it. Spider-Man didn't have that problem, but I completed it to 100% because I felt like, no, I'm still having fun. I kept playing it for about a week and a half. I was playing it for hours per day. I cleaned up all the trophies. And yeah, the last few were a bit tedious because it was waiting for things to spawn so I could go doing them. But I'd say for, the 30, 40 hours I played of it, like, I loved 30 hours of it, and that was including all the main story and a good chunk of the side stuff. It was only just waiting for the last types of enemies to spawn around the city that started to feel a little bit like, whatever. So there you go. That's basically it. So that's number 10, Spider-Man. Really good. Can't wait for the sequel. Insomniac did a great job with it. And people always say, why do you why did you get a PlayStation over an Xbox? And it's the games. I like Sony's exclusives. Xbox exclusives don't really do anything for me. Although I do, I really respect Game Pass and the idea of all their games going there day one. That's a fantastic move. I wish Sony would do that, because I would never buy a game again. I would just have their version of Game Pass, and that'd be me. I'd be done with it. I don't need to spend $60 plus a game, every time. I'm good. So that's Spider-Man, number 10. Number 9 is something very different, and this is Gone Home, which came out, I believe, in 2013, and it is about 2 hours long, and you play as a character who's maybe a bit college-aged, this woman who comes back home after being away at either college or whatever, and the home's empty. And you spend the game going around the home looking for clues as to why your parents or your sister aren't there. And it tells a story as you find more things and you do simple little puzzly things to unlock new parts of the house. You find more and more notes that kind of reveal where everyone is, and it kind of tells a story. And the reason why I like this so much is some people call this a walking simulator, and it kind of is, in that you don't really do, there's no combat, you don't really do anything else, but it tells a story. As you find more and more of the notes around the house, it builds this story of what her sister had went through. And it even gets kind of creepy at a couple of points where you start to think maybe something will jump out at me. And I think one of the best things this game does is that it really puts you in a place where you think, oh, something really bad happened. And I won't say if it did or not, but there was definitely several times in this game where I got really worried about the outcome of the story. And the story does have a point at the end. It's a really sweet story, but also has its dark moments. And it's all told through finding... It's almost like if you took Resident Evil and took out, and distilled it down to just the finding the notes and discovering what happened, and someone just focused on that part of it, but told a really cool story out of it. You can get it on PC. I think it's on the consoles now, PS4 and Xbox One. It should be cheap. It's because it's not that long a game, but it's a 2 hour. It took about 2 hours to play the first time I played it. In fact, funnily enough, when I played this, it wasn't on consoles yet, and I actually just built my first ever gaming PC. This was the first thing I played on it. I really wanted to play Gone Home, which was not like a showpiece for like what PCs can do or how fancy they can be with the effects and how the visual quality. But this was the first thing I played on it because I really wanted to play Gone Home, and it didn't disappoint. I loved it. So, Gone Home, number 9. Number 8 is Deus Ex Human Revolution. This came out in 2011, and this was kind of a return for a franchise that had been dormant for a long time from Square Enix. They made Deus Ex in like 2000-ish, and then there was one sequel soon after that I don't think was as well received. And I've not played those, outside of a little bit of the first one. And when I mean a little bit, I do mean like I played like a part of the first mission. Because it's kind of old, and like I'd really have to sit and like devote time to learn how to play it and get into it, because it's a bit more less user friendly, shall we say? Because games have of course gotten a lot better at really sort of making us feel comfortable getting to know the systems and things like that. But this is a cyberpunk game where you play as Adam Jensen. You're in the future. You feel like you're in the future, like maybe RoboCop might have led to, but with more of a sort of somber atmosphere, I guess. And you have augmentations. It's in first person, but when you go into cover, you switch to third person, which is actually a really interesting system to me, because I'm someone who's always preferred third person, and I found myself actually really liking this game, because the reason why you might like getting into cover or switching to third person, it's not just for the shooting, it's actually because there's a lot of stealth in this game, or there can be. In fact, one of the main strengths of this game, and even just the franchise in general, is that you can choose to go in like a first-person shooter and shoot everything up. You can put all your experience, because it's an RPG, right? There's a lot of RPG elements in this. You can choose to put all your stuff into your combat and strength, and be a tank and just shoot everything like you're playing Doom. You can do that, and it's a valid way to play the game. But you can also put all your stuff into stealth and non-lethal takedowns and combat and things like that. And I hate first-person stealth. I hate it with a passion. But third person, I feel like, okay, now I've got a fighting chance. And I tried to be as stealthy as possible in this game, and it was designed really well to make you feel like, okay, you could be shooting and stuff, but at the same time, when you go into cover, okay, you're in third person now, and you can sort of look at your surroundings. You can try and make the best choices possible to try and stay in cover. And you get more skills and stuff as you level up. I have to mention the music here. I mean, the music was good in Spider-Man and Gone Home, but I love the score for Deus Ex Human Revolution. There was a period in like 2011, 2013 or whatever where I was listening to it like constantly. Really good stuff. Story's solid. It's not the best story versus some of the other ones I'm talking about here. Like Spider-Man's story was a lot more memorable, and I remember the beats, and I cared about the characters. I wouldn't say I cared about the characters in the story here. The story in Deus Ex Human Revolution is a lot more what I would just call, it's a serviceable video game story. But what makes it really fun is the atmosphere, going around all these locations, feeling like you're in all these like seedy espionage style places in the future. Try to take down corporations and stuff like that. And then also the gameplay, it's the choice. And I mentioned that you have a choice of being stealthy or really shitty. You also have a choice in other types of skills that can help you with other things. For example, let's say you have to get into an apartment building and go into an apartment so you can steal something that's needed for a quest, right? Because it's not open world. It's got like a hub world, and then there's like there's like missions that are more linear, like separately, but then there's a few hub worlds with a lot of different places you can go with side quests and stuff like that. But one of the things you can do is that you can either put all your points into hacking, so you can hack things and get in, sort of illegally, but like stealthily, right? You can put all your points into strength, so you can just break things down, but it leaves a trace. You can put all your points into perception or science, or lockpicking even, which is separate from hacking, right? And depending how you do it, and usually all these things that you can hack that have number codes, there's also ways to find the code with another skill. Like maybe you can get into something else. Like sometimes there'll be like locations that are blocked off with electrocuted water, but if you have the right leg upgrade, you can walk through that without getting hurt, and you'll find a code over there that will let you get into the door that was locked. So there's lots of different ways to get into every situation, and that's part of why it's such a good RPG in that sense. It's not so much that the storyline branches too much, but everything else about it feels like, okay, I have freedom. What type of character do I want to be? And yes, you'll miss out on certain things because you don't have certain skills, but you'll have access to other things because you have other skills, and it kind of balances itself out in that way. So you get to choose sort of what you're doing. But like I say, the atmosphere is tremendous, the music's tremendous. Deus Ex Human Revolution, very good. Next up, number 7. Again, I'm jumping around to very different types of game, which I think is good. I want a bit of variation in this. My number 7 is Slay the Spire, which is a game that came out a couple of years ago in early access. It was only on PC at first via early access, and it's on consoles now. It's on, I think, all the consoles now. And it is a it's a deck building roguelike, I believe is the correct term for it. And that basically means that because I don't play roguelites, I don't really like all the big roguelites that people talk about and say are great. I'm not really into them, mainly because I don't really like the combat in roguelites that much. This though is deck building. You're not fighting anything, you're not pressing buttons to do kicks and sword slashes or anything like that. You're playing cards, you have time to think about your choices. And it started with 2 characters. There was a third one added, and there's actually a fourth one in the early, or not the early access, but the beta, in beta mode right now on PC. And each different class or character has its own set of cards, and when you play through the game, you go from location to location, and you have enemy encounters, you have shops to buy stuff with because you're collecting gold, you have all these things, and a lot of it relies on luck, but also on you picking the right cards when you're offered them to build some sort of synergy to make sure that your cards benefit each other and you can survive to the end of the third act, or even the final boss, which you have to do a lot of stuff to get to. It's a very hard game when you first start playing it, and I really love the game, and it's funny because I thought it was really insanely hard, and I thought I'd be lucky to even finish it one day when I started playing it, because it took me like maybe 2 months to beat it the first time. And now I'm playing it on like Ascension 10 because there's a lot of replayability. Every time you beat it, you unlock the next harder difficulty, so you keep going, and you do that for every character. So I'm playing like Ascension 10-ish on all 3 characters right now, give or take. I think one's on 11, one's on 9, one's on 10. And like, it's getting really hard, right? And I'm really struggling, and it still has that feeling that I had back when I first started playing it, where I'm losing most of the time, but I'm getting better and smarter and figuring out how to do things. But what's funny is that when I go back and play it on normal mode, the way it starts when you first play it, which I did recently because Game Pass gave it to me for free, even though I already had it on PC. And I thought for just the fun of it, I would start the Game Pass version, and I found myself winning almost every time whilst it was on the normal difficulty. Like, I was winning out of the first 4 times I played it, I won, and that's insane to me given how much difficulty I had when I first started playing it. So you really get experience, not experience points like most video games, but you really gain experience as you play it, and you get better at it. And I find myself surprising myself at how much better I am at the game than I used to be, without even realizing that I've gotten that much better. So no, Slay the Spire is really good. Very different from a lot of other things you would play, and it's not multiplayer. It is not facing other people with cards. It's not like a Hearthstone or something like that. It's a single player deck building roguelike game where you're trying to like get the right deck of cards so you can beat the really tough bosses and finish the game. And there's a lot of replayability. I have hundreds of hours into this at this point, probably about 300 hours total. So I highly recommend Slay the Spire. So no story to speak of really, because it's not that type of game. Number 6 is going all the way back to 2010, probably the oldest game on this list, and that is Mass Effect 2. Mass Effect 2 is one of the best sequels of all time, probably. It took everything I liked about Mass Effect 1, which I thought was a little rough around the edges, but was really good, and did this insane thing where it took a great RPG that had a pretty solid story. I thought give it a better story, and I don't know, I may be in the minority in that opinion. I think Mass Effect 2's story is better, but it also made the core gameplay better, because Mass Effect as a franchise, I mean, you're shooting things, right? It's a shooter. It's an RPG, but when you're actually fighting enemies, you're taking cover, you're looking over cover and taking your shots. The second game made the shooting fun to do. In the first game, it wasn't that fun. In the first game, you kind of just put up with how mediocre the shooting was to get through the other more fun, interesting parts of the game. The second game made the shooting good. The second game had a better story. The second game had an even better soundtrack, which was already good in the first game, and a nice variety of characters where I took the time to speak to all the various characters in my crew. Because when you leave the ship, you go out with two of your characters, and there's a reason to build loyalty with all them, because they all have their own loyalty missions, which makes them better. And one of the most fun things with Mass Effect 2 is that if you actually gain everyone's loyalty, like, it'll change the ending of the game, because the big final mission, the big final suicide mission, lasts like an hour, and depending on what you've done in the game before you've decided to tackle that mission, will increase your chances of not only success of saving the day, but also how many of your crew survive. And the beautiful thing about this is that affects who's still alive in 3 when you play 3. Which is a game that I still quite like. I know people have a hate on for it because of the ending. And well, I don't like the ending that much either. I think the 29 or so hours before that last hour are so great that I don't really care that much. But that's just me. But I think 2 is the strongest of the trilogy, and the music's phenomenal. It's another one where I've listened to the soundtrack a bunch of times, and it's got some really notable characters. Hell, one of my cats is named after a character in this. I have a cat named Garrus, because Garrus is the best. And there's I like, it's just Mass Effect is the sort of science fiction that can appeal to me. It's obviously there's a lot of Star Wars in there, but it's not that close to Star Wars where I can get into it a lot more. It's definitely more science fiction than science fantasy, and that again, that's more away from the gameplay, more into the types of stories that I like, and type of worlds that I like. But you got some notable cast members in there as well. If you're a fan of Chuck and The Handmaid's Tale, Yvonne Strahovski plays one of the main characters. So she's in there. Seth Green's actually in all 3 games. He's the pilot of the ship, so that's really cool. Really good, really addictive. I started replaying the trilogy like a year or 2 ago, and I finished the first game and got halfway through the second game, and I had to do a lot of PC fixing around then, and I kind of lost track of it. The save's still there though, and I do fully intend to go back at some point and play the rest of 2 and 3 again. But Mass Effect 2 is fantastic. So that'll take me on to number 5, which is The Witcher 3, which came out in 2015. And is probably notable for being the second of 2 open world games. Although open world RPG tends to feel a little bit different to open world action adventure. Witcher is a game where I played a fair bit of the first one on PC, and She I'm sorry, there was a comment in chat that distracted me for a second. But I played a bit of Witcher 1 on PC, and it was a really hard game to play. The controls were not great, and I really liked what it was doing from the RPG. It felt like there was a lot of passion put into it, but it was definitely a bit clunkier. I played a little bit of 2, and I wanted to play it before 3 came out, but I just didn't have enough time. And I just dove into 3 because I wanted to play it, because it was a big hot new game, and I loved it. And the fact that I hadn't played 1 and 2 actually didn't really hurt my enjoyment of it that much. It introduced everything it needed to do to make me care about the central story, which is that you're this Geralt of Rivia, and you're going after this girl Ciri, who you treated like a daughter for a long time, and she's been missing, and there's these big bad, demon-y guys after her, and you try to find her. And you have help from 2 of your exes, who, I mean, depending on your choices, might not be exes by the end of the game, but really, really good. Yeah, you're bored now, you distracted me. So, really, really good. And I think what makes Witcher stand out is I think the combat in the third one's pretty enjoyable, even though it's not the best thing about the game. It's the writing, and more impressively, not just the main story. The main story has some great beats to it, and I really get into like searching for Ciri, and I really like I want a Witcher 4 with where my ending kind of hinted it was going, and I really want that. But Witcher 3's strength, in a lot of ways, comes from the writing of the side stories, and this is insane to me because usually the side stories are just that, they're side stories. But Witcher 3 has this great thing where all of them feel like they have these great little self-contained stories. There's a site, I can't remember what the quest was called, but there's a quest in the middle of it when you get to one of the bigger cities where you're literally investigating a murder in this city, and it's so different to like all the other quests. And then there's other quests where you're making moral choices most of the time about, like who you're siding with by the end of the quest. There's at one point you're hunting for someone's lost child, but then at the end, the father's maybe not the best place for this kid to go. So you're making these really hard moral choices that dictate where things are going to go later in the game, or at least how certain characters treat you later in the game. And they're all these little well-told great stories, and I enjoyed almost all of them. Like almost all of them were really enjoyable on their own right, as a beginning, middle, and an end. And then on top of that, you have this main story you're going through, which sometimes doesn't measure up to the side stories, and sometimes really gets me into it. But I was so invested the whole time. I mean, it took me like 60 hours to beat Witcher 3, and most of my favorite games take much less than that. Most of my favorite games I can beat in 30 or less. A lot of them 15 or less. And which is why I feel weird when people complain about games being too short. I'm like, I don't want hundreds of hours of an RPG. That sounds like too much grinded and stuff like that. So, is what it is. But Witcher 3 is fantastic. Great voice acting again. Great music again. Another one that I listen to the soundtrack a lot. At least a few of the tracks anyway. Obviously, the TV show is coming very soon. In fact, we might even have reviewed the first episode before this video goes up. I don't know when I'm going to get a chance to edit this to put the final form of it out, but hopefully the show, works for me. And here's the impressive thing about Witcher for me personally, is that I don't like fantasy. I do not like Lord of the Rings. I do not like Game of Thrones. There's very few things that are high fantasy that I tolerate, never mind actually like. And Witcher 3 shot to the top of the list where no, that's my favourite fantasy thing. No question. It's Witcher 3, never-ending story, Stardust, and the rest, away with you. I want no part of the rest. So yes, Witcher 3 is number 5. Number 4, and this was not intentional, but number 4 is Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. And I love Naughty Dog. I love the Uncharted series. The first one's very simple and not as great as the rest come, but it's still really enjoyable to play. And I love playing it when I first got my PS3 back in like 2009, because I got a PS3 right before Uncharted 2 came out because that looked good. And I played 1, enjoyed it. 2 was even better. 2 is phenomenal. And Uncharted 3 I also thought was fantastic. And Uncharted 4 was really interesting because Uncharted 4 was coming after The Last of Us, and it was like, okay, they've kind of evolved as a studio, so what's it going to be like? And Uncharted 4, it took the storytelling that really made me care in the last couple of games, because I really grew to care about Nathan and Elena and Sully, that trio of characters I really grew to love. And Uncharted 4 did this ballsy thing where it took the story ahead in time and really gave us this end of someone's not life. It's not like Nathan Drake's like ancient in it. He's middle aged, but he's got a family, he's got a wife. He's there's the chance of having kids, that kind of thing, and it does these great. And I know some people hate this because it's like chapter 5 before you even get to shoot anything in the game, but I loved all the story in this, and the story is so well told. And it uses it to great effect, but there's certain points in the game. There's a scene in this game where after climbing something, Nathan and Elena like essentially have an awkward moment with each other as a married couple, and then you have to drive to another location, and basically it's awkward silence, and you feel that awkward silence as you're driving, and you feel like a little bit sick, like you're worried that they might not make it as a couple. And I felt that way anyway. I won't go into any more detail, I don't want to spoil much, but it has me caring about everything the character's going through, and I love the ending of it, and it is a send-off for these characters. And they did that little spin-off, sort of shorter experience with some of the side characters later, but This really was the end of the story of Uncharted, and I mean, I don't really mind there being more Uncharted games, but it can't be these characters. It can't be Nathan, Sully, and Elena. They have to, they've had their send off. They've had the end of their story, and it's funny playing through them from 1 to 4 because it really shows the evolution of how Naughty Dog has been making games and how much better they've gotten at it, and just all the various set pieces they had in their games, and how much the characters, even though it's like a silly action adventure game, it's not like this deep stuff, but somehow like it got me to the point where in like 3 and 4 I was getting teary-eyed at a couple of moments because I care so much about those characters. And then I think some people complain about the shooting in Shroud. I think the shooting's fine. I think it's a third-person shooter. I think it's perfectly fine. And obviously all the platforming and stuff's cool. And one of the best things about Uncharted as well is the set pieces where you'll be fighting something and you'll literally be in like a vehicle or a building that's like tumbling, and you'll start sliding as you're shooting things, but you'll still be in control. It won't just go to a cutscene, at least not all the time, and that's part of the really fun. So Uncharted 4 is fantastic. So thumbs up. Number 3 is XCOM 2. XCOM 2 came out in 2016, and I was super pumped. Surprisingly so, because XCOM Enemy Unknown, which was the first game back, because XCOM was a series of PC games in the 90s, and somewhere in like 2010 or something like that, there was like a reveal trailer for like a new XCOM game, but it was like a first-person shooter like BioShock, and I didn't know what XCOM was, but the people who liked XCOM, the old games, were like livid, like, what is this? This isn't XCOM. And then I kind of forgot about it. That game never came out. And then all of a sudden, a few years later, this XCOM Enemy Unknown came out. And I didn't buy it at all, even. It was actually on PS Plus. I got PS Plus. And one of the first games that I tried through PS Plus was XCOM Enemy Unknown. Not knowing what type of game it was, just booting it up and seeing what it was. And it's a turn-based strategy game where you have a squad of soldiers. The aliens are invading the Earth, and with each squad member, you have you can move once and you can shoot, or you can move twice maybe. And as they level up, you get some better skills, and your various troop classes can do different things depending on what you pick. And it's very fun. It's very intense at times, because sometimes you have to move people into a risky place. It's another type of game where at first you're probably going to suck at it because it takes a lot of thought. And it's one of the few games actually, because you can get better at Devil May Cry by watching someone else play Devil May Cry. At least not really. Like maybe you'll pick up a few tips, but like playing something like Devil May Cry is a lot of the reflexes. It's a lot of like just raw skill. But I remember I watched someone else play XCOM, someone who was good at it. I watched someone play XCOM for a little bit who was good at it, and all of a sudden it completely changed how I approached the game because I understood the philosophy of how to play XCOM, and I got better at it. And I'm not amazing at it. I there's people who run circles around me, but I am solid enough at it to get it through on normal or hard at the very least. Legend, maybe one day I'll beat XCOM 2 on Legend. I hope I can someday. But XCOM 2 though is the one we're talking about, because that's what introduced me to it, and I loved XCOM Enemy Unknown. And I'm not going to lie, there was a point in time where I might have had this also scraping in the top 10. It might have made it here, and it didn't. But XCOM 2 takes everything I loved about it and makes it better. The maps were no longer set maps; they're procedurally generated. The graphics look nicer, of course, which isn't the most important thing, but they do. The classes have got a lot more going for them. As does the research, as does the way that the home map works. A lot of the skills they added are really useful and fun. Like, for example, the Rangers who are up front, giving them machetes and giving some melee options really added a lot to it. And then on top of that, you have all these other little things that just make the game feel amazing. Because one of the things you do in XCOM, including the first one, is you rename your soldiers, and if you're like me, you remember them better if they're names that you associate. So I often will have I'll have a Bruce Wayne, and I'll have a Michael Myers, and a Jill Valentine or whatever. And in XCOM 2, you have a character pool. You can actually make all your characters and set the game up so that it'll just pick people from that pool when it's giving you new troops in the game throughout the story mode, throughout the campaign, and that makes it really fun. It's just such a simple little thing that has added so much value to that game for me, and I think a lot of people. And this is another game like Slay the Spire. I have got 250, 300 hours into this, which some people play more than I do. I have too many other commitments to put in thousands of hours into games, but it's one that I keep going back to. It's one that I keep playing again and again, because I always I get so obsessed with it. When that game came out in January 2016, I played it probably like 6, 7, 8 hours a day for like 2 weeks until I beat it, and I think I even started up again hard in that time. Like, I really dove into it head first. The progression feels great. It's really like, you feel rewarded, and it feels like everything's attainable, but at the same time challenging. So really, really cool stuff. And the actual core gameplay, like, it feels so satisfying to set up a little, like, you've got 2 here, so you try and flank one, and when you outsmart the computer, when you outsmart the AI, you feel great. But sometimes it goes wrong. Sometimes your troop, because what happens is when you get someone into range, you'll click on the take shot button, and it'll give you a percentage chance to hit. So if you flank someone and get behind their cover, you've got a really high chance. But if they've got cover, you may have a low chance or whatever, and sometimes your options are limited and you have to take risks. But every time you take a shot, you roll the dice, and they're loaded in your favour or against you, depending on where your troop is. So it's all about placement, it's all about trying to get in the right places and making sure your troops have cover to defend or lower the risk of getting hit, all that kind of stuff. It's so intricate, and it feels so rewarding to get good at. So XCOM 2, I thoroughly can't recommend enough. So that'll take me on to number 2, which is no surprising to anyone that knows me, Resident Evil 2 Remake. That's just come out in January of 2019. It's not even been a full year at the time of recording. And yes, I am excited for Resident Evil 3 before anyone asks. I could spend probably hours just talking about why this game was important to me and why I was so excited and hopeful but nervous when it was coming out. Resident Evil as a franchise is what made me a gaming fan. I played a couple of games before it, but Resident Evil 1 on PlayStation 1 was the game that said, hey, games can do this. Games can tell a story, games can give you atmosphere. That's one thing I never really felt in a game before, was atmosphere. And I felt scared. I was scared playing that game as a kid. And Resident Evil 2 took that again and gave me another adventure in the style of the game, and 3 again, and Code Veronica, I like the remake of the first game in GameCube, which is actually my favorite game of all time, and still is. So so you're saying to yourself, okay, so you love Resident Evil. Why is this particular game important? Because after those games, after Remake, we got Zero, which you control 2 characters, so it was a little bit different, but still in the old formula, and it was okay, but it was easily the weakest of all those games. Of all the mainline games we've had up until that point, Zero was the weakest. No big deal. It won't always be amazing. Sometimes it'll just be good, and that's okay. But after that, Resident Evil 4 happened, and Resident Evil 4 decided to completely change everything. Resident Evil 4 said, no, we're not doing survival horror anymore. We're not doing a mansion or a police station or even a city in 3 or various locations in the other games. We're not going to be finding keys. We're not going to be learning the layout of a building so that you can get excited when you find a key for a door that you already know you can get into. We're not going to have save rooms. We're not going to have restricted ammunition, at least to the same extent. Resident Evil was always about finding the right things, and that feeling of like euphoria that would wash over you when you realized, oh, that door in the main hall that I've been trying to get into since I started playing this game, and now 7 hours in, I have found that key. That feeling is wonderful. That feeling is beautiful. That feeling of relief when you're opening a new door, you've got almost no health left. You have to find a save room. You have to get to that item box where you've stored all your excess goods. You need to get health because you're worried that the next room might have something in it that will kill you and you'll lose progress, which is important in a survival horror game. Like, auto-saving, really shouldn't be a thing. You should have to at least get to save stations, which you do in Resident Evil with typewriters. That feeling of euphoria as the save room music plays as you enter the room, you're like, oh my god, it's safe. Oh, thank god. All that, right? That kind of went away. Everything I loved about it went away. Now, I'm not dissing 4 because 4 is a fantastic game. Resident Evil 4 is one of the best action games ever made. But it's not survival horror. I wouldn't even really call it Resident Evil. It's Leon Kennedy's in it, and Herbs are used for health, but other than that, it's really just its new own thing, and that's fine. It's its own new thing. It's a fantastic game, but it kind of killed not only my franchise as the way I knew it, but it also killed my genre. It killed what I thought of as survival horror. And Resident Evil 5, did a co-op version of 4, which was okay, but not as good. 6 was absolute garbage. There were some spin-off games that were okay. But basically what I'm saying is that for, from 2003 until 2019, the genre that I loved was basically dead. And I spent years not having my favourite genre to play. Resident Evil 7 did bring back some stuff, which I was also very happy about, and has a lot of strong elements to it. But 7 still flubbed for me in a number of ways. I didn't like the stealth stuff. It reminded me of games like Outlast and stuff like that, which I do not like very much. They're not my types of game. And I hated the stuff early on where Jack's chasing you around the house. I hated that stuff with a passion. But there were save rooms and there was some key finding. I did kind of find it a little bit linear still, where it felt like it always directed you in the one place you could go. But there was a lot of positives, and there was definitely things I liked about it. First person camera, not as much. I prefer third person, especially for Resident Evil. So when they announced the 2 remake was coming, I got really excited, and then they eventually revealed it. It took a long time, but they revealed it at E3 in 2018, and it looked really promising, and the demo felt really promising. I was kind of hoping for fixed camera angles, but I'll accept it. And playing this game, it was everything I wanted. It took Resident Evil 2, put it into a much scarier setting where it had a lot more mood lighting, of course, because it's not this bright PS1 game. It enhanced the stories of both Leon and Claire. It did have the A and B stuff. It did have most of the enemies anyway. It didn't have the spiders, but it did have most of the enemies that you remembered and things like that. And I love, I always preferred Claire over Leon, or at least I thought I always leaned towards Claire, but the remake really made me pick Claire over Leon. I think her story's better. I think the character's more interesting. I think the voice actor's better as well, which is important for the game. That said, though, I think both stories are fun to play through. But the main thing is that it was save rooms. It was finding keys and key items and like getting that valve or getting that crank or getting that clutch ammo before a boss fight, or all these different things that make Resident Evil to me that I was missing for a decade and a half, right? Just over a decade and a half. The last time I got what I would consider a proper Resident Evil game was 2003. So I can't really begin to explain how playing Resident Evil 2 Remake in January of this year felt to me. It was one of the most special, exciting things in gaming that I've ever had. Was that feeling of, this is my genre coming back. This is my favorite type of game, and I get to play it again. This is beautiful, and it's not a straight line. You can get lost. You can go to the wrong place. You can get stuck for a little bit. I want to be able to do those things because I want to feel rewarded for figuring it out. I want to figure things out sometimes. I want to get excited because the note I picked up has the code for the safe on the other side of the building. I want to get excited for this and for that. All these things. This did all these things, and because this was made in conjunction with 3 rather, I'm excited for 3. I'm pretty confident 3 is going to be what I want it to be. It's great seeing all those locations in a modern graphics sort of style. It's great to see all those things. Yeah, and here's the thing. I beat the game. I played it all night when it came out at midnight. Obviously, I didn't get to start till midnight because, so that's late. So I didn't get to quite finish it that first night. But the second day when I finished it, I immediately started up the next campaign. I went from Claire A to Leon B. And I finished Leon B that second night. And then after that, I went straight into, let's do Claire A. Let's do the other way around. And I kept playing it. And I streamed a lot of this as well. You can find a lot of it on the other channel. It's there. And I cannot wait for 3. It's insane to me that 3 is coming out so soon, and Resident Evil 2 is special to me because it basically resuscitates an entire genre that that was lost, because there was other games in the genre. There was Silent Hill, 1, 2, 3 especially were very much the same genre as Resident Evil. It was the same type of gameplay. It had its own lot of quirks, but it was the same type of stuff. There was save rooms, there was key items, there was figuring out puzzles. The puzzles, if anything, were more obscure in Silent Hill, and that kind of went away and became something different as well, and then just died because Konami didn't want to do it anymore. Dino Crisis after the first game even stopped being survival horror, but the first one was. So, Resident Evil. So I hope 8 takes more from 2 and 3 remake than it does from 7. Personally, but I mean, obviously, a lot of people love 7. Some people love 7. I think 7's okay. It has some really good stuff. Has some stuff I really don't like as well. More of a mixed bag. But Resident Evil 2, I love, and it's one of my favorite experiences of the decade for sure. It's not even it's not even close. Like, I can tell you right now, Resident Evil 3. If I'm doing like a top 5 next year, Resident Evil 3 will be in the top 2 or 3. Right? There's a couple other big games that are going to vie for that top spot. So I can't say it's going to be number 1 necessarily, but it's got a good chance. And one of the reasons why I can't say it's going to be number 1 next year necessarily, because my number 1 movie of the decade, sorry, not movie, my number 1 video game of the decade is The Last of Us. So I can't say Resident Evil 3 is a shoe-in for best game of the year next year, because Last of Us 2 is coming out in May. I've got Resident Evil 3 remake in April, and Cyberpunk, which is obviously from the creators of The Witcher, CD Projekt Red, right? They did Witcher 3, Cyberpunk's out this April, Resident Evil 2, we're getting Resident Evil 3 in April, Last of Us is my number 1, and we're getting Last of Us 2 in May. Next year for me is insane when it comes to video games that I care about. It is absolutely insane. Last of Us, I loved Uncharted. I think Last of Us is Naughty Dog's best game. I think it takes all of the things they learned from Uncharted and gives it that much heavier emotional story, where I did tear up at multiple times throughout this game. It gives it a great story where it's not just you're a hero and you're going to save people. No, it's got complex characters who make tough choices, who do some bad things. And sometimes, and this is the beautiful thing about the way Last of Us tells its story, is that sometimes you can see the characters making bad choices and it makes you not like them. Especially earlier on. As you get later in the game and you're getting towards those final moments, there's points where the choice that the main character that's making is wrong, right? You know that he is doing something that is probably the wrong thing to do, but you side with him anyway. And you, as a player, you're motivated to accomplish the thing that he's doing. You sets up that he wants to do X thing. And I'm thinking at the very end in here, I don't want to spoil it, but the last final proper chapter before the little epilogue thing, like, you're given this hard bit of the game to go through, and you're going through the game, but you're motivated the entire time. It's this beautiful thing where games obviously naturally get a bit more difficult as they progress, right? You get to the end of a game, and things at the end of the game should be harder than the rest, right? It's just a natural progression. But what Naughty Dog do so well, what Last of Us does to perfection, is that not only does the game get harder at the end, your determination to beat the harder enemies is equally there, because you're emotionally invested in what they're trying to do. You're invested to get to the end point that the character's trying to get to, because you care about the outcome the same way the character does. And in this case with Last of Us, you can debate if he's doing the right thing, but I think most people playing it say, I know this might be wrong, but I'm with him. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this because I care about this character, and I'm going to do it no matter what, and I don't give a shit what this affects. I am doing this because these are the characters that I have spent, I think Last of Us is like 15 hours or whatever it is, maybe even 20 over the course of the whole thing. Like, you spent all that time getting to know these characters, and it's such a well-told story. It's such a great journey going across the country, and you have all these different sections, and you really start to really get to know Ellie and Joel, and their relationship is like so antagonistic with each other at first, and they kind of bond, and we have this like surrogate father-daughter thing going on. It's this great story, and that's before we even get to clickers and how scary it can be at times with the gameplay and and some people don't like the gameplay of Last of Us. I love the stealth. I love sneaking around clickers, and I'm fine with the shooting. Again, I like Uncharted shooting as well, so this is maybe a taste thing, but like I've never had a problem with the combat in the game, and I loved it, and it is more linear than a survival horror game traditionally, right? It's not a survival horror game because it's not save rooms, it's not these things. But it does give you that the item finding stuff. It gives you how valuable the ammunition is very limited. You find things to make like Molotov cocktails out of, and you find stuff for XP and that. So there's a little bit of RPG-ness in that, because you're finding like weapon parts to upgrade your weapons, and you're finding pills to upgrade some of your skills. And those are very video gamey, but they make a lot of sense to be there, and they do give you a nice sense of progression as you're going through. But that is like, that is a backdrop to the raw kind of like sneaking around and like just try to survive. You always feel like you're just trying to survive, and I'm engrossed in it the entire time. And I think Last of Us's final moments, like the ending, is one of the most poignant endings of a video game I've ever seen. And it's one of those things where I talk about video games where, yeah, it's a fine video game story, and I would describe, Deus Ex Human Revolution, I said, as that. Resident Evil even, Resident Evil 2 Remake even, which I think is even better story-wise than the original Resident Evil 2, I wouldn't say it's an amazing story, I'd say it's a really solid, like, knockoff of Aliens. I'd say it's very, very solid for what it's doing, but it's not like, give this awards for writing. Give it awards for a lot of other things, but not for the writing of the story. But there's some games, and I'd say Witcher 3 kind of sneaks in there, but Last of Us definitely does, where, no, this storytelling is better than other things. This storytelling is, fights with the best of television. This storytelling fights with the best of movies. And, the story in Resident Evil 2 isn't doing that. The story in Resident Evil 2 maybe competes with like a B-movie story. But what gives Resident Evil 2 its depth, what gives Resident Evil 2 its weight, is how meticulous all the other elements are as a game, as the gameplay, there's the experiences, the atmosphere, all these different things. And Last of Us has a lot of that too, of course. But Last of Us has this story, this script, this writing, these performances, this performance capture that gets you so invested in what it's doing that if you let yourself get swept away with the story and you let the motivations of the characters hit you and you feel that motivation yourself when you're playing, and it drives how you want to play, where you find yourself, when you get angry at a character who just did something bad and then you get to actually engage with them in combat, you find yourself swearing at them, you find yourself saying, come here, you little effer, and you find yourself getting really into it and upset. And, with any game that gets as much recognition as Last of Us does, that gets all those 10 out of 10s when it comes out, and all those, Game of the Year awards and everything else, there's always going to be a backlash, because there's always going to be people who don't get it, who say, I didn't feel any of this. And honestly, if you feel that way, I'm just sorry. Like, I'm sorry you don't get to feel what I felt when I played this game. Because this game, for me, elevated the entire genre of video games, the entire medium of video games. It said, no, games can be this now. Games don't just have to be good at this one thing, they can be really good at this instead. And gaming is such a diverse medium anyway, because you have all these different things. In this top 10, I had Gone Home, which was nothing but storytelling, mostly via text. And then I had Slay the Spire, which had no story. It was all about just playing cards and mechanics and like trying to outsmart the logic of the card playing. Very different, completely different experiences. I love them both. Last of Us says, no, we can compete with HBO. We can compete with like Christopher Nolan or whatever. Like, take your pick. Like that's what Last of Us does, as well as being also just a great game to play and feel. And people disagree with that. Some people hate how it shoots and hate all those other things. But to me, it's a testament to how caring about what's happening enhances every single thing you're doing. And by the time I get to like halfway through that game on the first playthrough, I mean, now I just care from the start because I already care about everything, but by the time you get to the point halfway through when you're worried that one character might die and you're really worried about where they are, or you're cut off, or you're put in vulnerable situations, you find yourself getting scared, not because like in Resident Evil you're worried you're going to die, you get worried that Ellie or Joel are going to die. You get concerned for them as characters, not as yourself as the player. And when you're playing Resident Evil, part of the fear is, I don't want to die because I'm going to lose progress. And that's valid. That's a normal thing for them to go after. And it's something they've done very well. But what Last of Us does is different. Is I'm not scared about dying because I'm losing progress. Last of Us has constant autosaves. It has constant checkpoints. It's not wanting to make you frustrated because of that. It makes you want to save the person you're playing as, because the characters are that good. And that is why it's number one. That is why it's my favourite game of the decade. And one of my favourite games of all time. So, there you go. That is my top 10 video games of the decade. That's 2010 to 2019. And every so often there'll be some asshole who says, but surely the decade can't start on the 0 year. Surely it's 1 through 10. No, decades don't work like that. Like the 20s, 1920 is not part of the teens. It's part of the 20s. 1930s part of the 30s, 1940s part of the 40s, and no one's ever going to say otherwise, except from snarky assholes on the internet. But anyway, that is my top 10 games of the year. This was something I did during a live stream, although I've paid attention to you, the audience, to make this video, because I want this to be a proper episode. So here we go. Top 10 games of the decade. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this list. By all means, let me know your favourite games of the decade. Give your own top 10s if you want to in the comments. You can like and subscribe. You can get us on Twitter at mailed_fuzz for channel updates. You can support the show in a number of different ways. Obviously, you can like and subscribe, all that stuff. But you can also do it in patreon.com/mailfuzztv. Where you can support us for as little as $1 per month, and for that dollar you get bonus episodes of certain movie podcasts that we do. You get various outtakes and stuff from some of the tangents we have, but otherwise, that's all. That's just for $1 per month. You get to support the shows and everything we do. Obviously there's higher tiers as well. You can get voting rights and so on and so on, but go have a look, see if you're interested. But otherwise, that is us. So thank you very much for joining me. Go keep playing video games. I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.